welcome to Overcoming the Hidden Barriers of Work. I'm Tim Hemmings and I'm the president of the BML Society. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to attend. I think it's going to be a really good event and yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So today we're going to be discussing how both mental health and hidden disabilities can affect not only the workplace, but the recruitment process. I'm delighted to be joined by Amy Donlevy from Bird Bird, Chris Dowling from the FCA, and Tab Ahmed from EmployAbility. So jumping right into it, starting with Tab, then Chris, then Amy. Please could you introduce yourself a bit and talk a little about your background?
Sure. Hi there, everyone. I'm Tab Ahmed. I'm the founder and CEO of EmployAbility. Really delighted to be here this evening. And I set up EmployAbility about 14 years ago because I noticed there was a real gap between the support offered to talented, neurodiverse and disabled students and graduates or those with mental health. Companies were missing out on real talent. And I thought it would be a great idea to actually be able to connect these and really to ensure that students with or without a disability, or with a disability, or with mental health, are getting the careers that they deserve. So that's me, Amy.
Okay, I shall go next. So my name is Amy Donlevy. I studied law at Newcastle University and graduated in 2019. I then went on to work for a FTSE 100 mining company for the last year. And I'm now currently studying my LPC to start a training contract with a international law firm called Bird Bird in September 2021. I am a first generation university student, but I'm also dyslexic. And I was lucky enough that my dyslexia was spotted when I was quite young. It was spotted when I was 8, but it also meant that I did face a few challenges in the education system, getting kind of the extra time and the adjustments that I required. There you go, pass it over.
I'm still learning how to unmute myself and mute myself even remotely. So hi everyone, my name is Chris Dowling. I'm the graduate recruitment lead at the Financial Conduct Authority. I studied French and management at the University of Reading and then did a master's in an international French business school. A bit of background about me. So I started on the graduate scheme at KPMG in HR management consulting. I then did a secondment over into the early careers team and absolutely loved working with existing grads. Since then, I've worked at IHS Markit and Morgan Stanley in the early careers team and moved over to the FCA about 2 months ago now, so relatively new here. With regards to disability, so mine falls under the mental health category. So I have post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and I am a clinical insomniac. So I think a lot of the experiences that I have had have been slightly different when it comes to some of the stigmas around mental health. But when I started my career about 7-8 years ago, I found there's been a huge evolution of the understanding of mental health, both within HR practices and also within the recruitment system. And I feel really positive about the future of people disclosing their disabilities and also the support that is available from a variety of different employers.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I completely agree. So I thought a good place to start would be to give a little introduction to neurodiversity and hidden disabilities. So Tab, how would you explain neurodiversity to someone who's not heard the term before?
So yeah, I mean, neurodiversity is a term that started to become very popular in the last few years and is becoming more so. And I guess how I frame it or how I think of it is the idea that neurological differences, things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, etc., are the result of normal natural variations in the human genome. There's a whole host of conditions covered under this, but obviously how it impacts people varies enormously from person to person. Amy's mentioned she's got dyslexia. And I think that for many people at university, it's often diagnosed at university. These conditions can be diagnosed at university, if not earlier. And somebody who's bright or smart can do really well throughout education. And then when they get to university, they often find they need extra support to be able to perform to their best ability. And similarly for employment. So we want to make sure that anybody with a neurodiverse condition or any other hidden disability, Chris mentioned mental health, for example, any other hidden disability, that really the right adjustments can be put in place to ensure that people can do as well as they can going through a recruitment process in the workplace.
Fantastic. So we're going to be talking a lot about inclusivity today. So I thought it'd be a good question to ask about why inclusivity of all disabilities or mental health conditions is important. Amy, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, of course. So for me, I think I view inclusivity as not just being allowed to be there, but actually being part of the environment of a community and belonging. Personally, it's very important to me because, as I touched upon earlier, during my education, so that's primary school, secondary and sixth form, I found that I was quite ostracised and not being able to get that extra time. Or being made feel bad and having to go through loopholes in order to get it. And so I think it's really important that we create this sense of an inclusive environment where adjustments are made correctly, because if people feel part of a community and they feel like they belong, I think people perform much better. I think productivity is much higher, and mental wellness is so important for individuals to be able to succeed.
Tab, if you'd like to go next.
So yeah, I mean, look, our world is diverse. We live in a diverse world, and I think it's really important that inclusion is a part of that. And Amy's mentioned belonging. Yeah, sort of, we used to all talk about diversity, and it became diversity and inclusion. Now it's become diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And I think that belonging one is a really important one, because firms can't make someone feel like they belong. Somebody just has to feel like they belong. And so the way that that happens is that it's really down to the firm to create that culture of acceptance, culture of belonging, where people feel that they're part of something where they're accepted. They don't have the sorts of experiences that Amy talked about, sort of when she was younger, for example. And so I think it's really imperative, and I think from a business perspective as well, it's been proven time and time again that diverse teams perform better. And obviously, if you can make the diverse people within your organization, welcome them, open the doors, but it's not just about the door opening, it's also about what do you do once they're actually there. And that's where the belonging part, inclusion and belonging part, comes in. So I think it's an imperative because it makes business sense. It's the right thing to do. And I think particularly now, as the world is changing and we're in this very strange environment at the moment with the pandemic, what was really interesting to me was that people have sort of started working from home and so on, but actually overnight, companies, we all were able to actually change how we work. So change is certainly possible. And I think this is a fantastic illustration of it. So I hope there's other ways in which we can make changes to be more inclusive and to foster belonging in the work environment.
Okay, so I couldn't have phrased it better from both of you. I think in terms of where I can add some value here is, for me, diversity inclusion is so broad. You can talk about it in so many different ways. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. There's obviously a lot of culture historically in each of organizations, which are going to be sector specific, country specific. So for me, I think it's really important to know that with diversity and inclusion, you are at work more than you are at home. So you work 9 till 5, hopefully on a good day for most people. So the people who you surround yourself by, it is so important to get on with them. You don't have to like them, but you do have to respect them. So from my point of view, diversity and inclusion is so important because of the amount of time you're going to spend with your colleagues. It's also reflective of the outside world. So you don't just go to work and come back. You don't just go out and come back. I think it is representative of the world in which we live in. So it's a great environment to kind of really explore the differences which you have with other people and to get a better understanding. So it could be people of different religions, different disabilities, races. It's a great opportunity to upskill yourself and to learn. I think it's great to also, from a business perspective as well, rather than just the personal, it's great for problem solving. I mean, we all have such a unique path in life that we've experienced and will continue to experience. And I think with that in mind, you can't always assume that your idea is the best idea, because there'll be people who face similar challenges, or people who may not have seen it, but haven't had a challenge before, but can see it with a fresh pair of eyes. So I think that's really important. And to your point, Tab, around change, I think Something I feel quite passionate about is obviously organizational cultural change. People say that it can take, years for changes to happen, but I think coronavirus is a perfect example around how almost overnight organizations had to change HR policy, had to change infrastructure. And I think it should be the exact same thing for anything to do with disability or anything to do with inclusion. Yes, there are lots of different aspects to it, but I think a lot of the time we focus too much on how organizational change takes time. But I think coronavirus is a perfect example of how actually that isn't the case. It can happen really quickly if the right things and the right pressures are in momentum.
Yeah, that's perfect. So you mentioned how the unique perspective can really add something to an organization. And he may not be a business person, but one of the most well-known mental health and neurodiverse figures probably in Western culture is Kanye West. One thing he rapped about was how he found his bipolar was a superpower for him. It enabled him to be creative. So what I'm interested in is, for Amy and Chris, do you think that do you view your condition as a superpower, or do you view it as more of a weakness, or how do you view your condition?
Okay, so my view on this is it really depends upon the environment that you are in order for your view of how your condition affects you. So when I was going through the education system, I definitely viewed it as a hindrance because of the obstacles that I faced. And it definitely knocked my confidence personally, academically, and professionally. But when I went to university and was put in the correct environment, so finding schemes such as employability, my view on it entirely changed. I realized that my disability had actually meant that I was much better at problem solving. I was much more resilient. And during that time, I had harnessed my skill in advocacy. So I knew that in interviews, I had to come across better than what I did in written assessments. And because I focused so much on that, it's meant that actually as an advocate, I've become quite natural in interviews anyway. Or I like to think I am anyway. So I think I very much now view it as a superpower, but also it's quite useful because I also now know where the flaws are in those HR systems. And I think that's something we can touch on later, but it's really useful to see those flaws because then when you enter into a system, you can help them change it. So yeah, hopefully change it for the better.
For me, I think you touched on an amazing point, Amy, about it's the environment in which you're in and the support that's available. I personally love this question because whenever someone mentions the word disability or adjustment or condition, there's always such a negative connotation, like, oh, how can we help you? But actually, it's a case of, no, we can help you. I see the word condition or disability as I may be different from the normal for X reason. So for me, I can go, my record is 61 hours of no sleep. You have no idea how much you can do in 61 hours if you're not sleeping. My productivity is absolutely incredible. So I will whack emails out. When I'm not sleeping, I'm writing a book at the moment. There's so much which you can do. So I see my sleep. It's not always good because obviously there are lots of, health implications to it. But for me, I see it as really empowering, which I can use my time and try and see it as in a productive manner. And I guess from the PTSD and mental health side of things, I think obviously, it's not fun. It's not ideal. I would rather not have them. Of course not. I'm not going to deny that. But to put a positive spin on it, I think with my mental health condition, I have so much empathy for absolutely anyone who is going through anything. For me, you have to look at everyone's own experiences in the context of how they've grown up, what they're going through at the moment, and it should be emotions based. If something's upsetting someone or distressing someone, it's not up to me to comment on whether I think it should or not. The fact that it's having an adverse effect on them. So for me, I see it as a superpower because it's really enhanced my empathetic skills as well. And that's, really important working in the early careers landscape, because I think, and we'll touch on this later, when it comes to reasonable adjustments, when it comes to HR support, for me, that is the most integral thing, because we can't assume that people already know what support is available as well. People have to take responsibility for letting how things affect them, but we also have to create and foster an environment where people are happy to disclose those issues and know that support is available for them.
So I thought for the next part of the panel, we'd focus in on mental health and talk to Tav specifically about this. So I want to start off by asking, what can be the impact of going through the recruitment process if you have a mental health condition, and what adjustments can be made to counteract that?
Yeah, so I mean, look, we meet a lot of students who have mental health conditions. Mental health can range from things like depression or anxiety or panic attacks, whole host of different things, bipolar, whole host of different things. And typically going through a recruitment process is already pretty stressful for everybody because it's a really competitive process. I think if you have a mental health disability, that can be exacerbated in a stressful situation, and the same can apply to lots of other conditions too. But talking about mental health, it can be exacerbated. What that can mean is that somebody might appear, or actually not just appear, but be feeling much more anxious than they otherwise would be. That might impair how they come across. It might mean that they forget things in the interview. It might mean they need extra thinking time. And so the sorts of adjustments that can be really helpful is things like, sorts of things we recommend is things like giving somebody extra time to process the information and to answer the question, not holding it against somebody if they don't appear super confident, for example, or if they're not making great eye contact. So I think a lot of the adjustments, I mean, there's things like extra time, but there's sort of the softer adjustments, things like adjustments of attitude. So, for asking from the interviewer to make sure they're not going to assess somebody negatively because that person is coming across in a different way to somebody else, and really just focusing in on the skill set that you're looking for from whoever you're trying to hire. So a whole host of things like that. And then particularly at the moment, I know there's a bit of a question about this later, but in the context of remote interviews, remote assessments as well, there can be other adjustments made. So things like requesting to be interviewed, maybe not having your camera switched on all the time, for example. So I know for a lot of people that can feel really intimidating. People can feel like they're too exposed, and it can feel harder than if you're actually sitting in front of somebody. So a whole host of different types of adjustments, but every adjustment has to be specific to the individual. So when we talk to students about disability, or any candidates about disability, it's all about individualized adjustments. What works for them, what's going to suit them, what are their particular needs. Two people with the same disability, whether it's mental health or dyslexia, any of these things can often have really different adjustment needs. So I think it's really important that the right adjustments put into place, and then people can feel comfortable enough to perform and show their skills and their abilities.
So given the current climate which we're in, which you mentioned earlier, what struggles does this create for people with mental health conditions, and what adaptations could they use, and how could organizations help ease the process to remote learning or remote working?
Yeah, so obviously mental health has really been talked about a lot during the pandemic. It was already quite a big thing, but it's really come to the fore, and it's come to employers' attention. So much so that actually Bird Bird, which is one of our clients, where Amy is, and actually they're a fabulous organisation, they recently asked us to do a session specifically on mental health for all their new trainees. So it wasn't just people who already had a pre-existing condition, it was about trying to manage everybody's mental health, actually. And part of that is around things like, for yourself, knowing what your stress points are. So thinking about how do you keep yourself as healthy as you can, eating properly, sleeping properly, all of those good things, making sure you're taking rest breaks. One of the typical things that we advise is, when you're working remotely, it's really easy to just arrange back-to-back meetings, not give yourselves any break, because you don't have to get from A to B, and it's really easy just to kind of go, I'll just finish this meeting, I'll just start up another one now. But that can create a lot of stress without that break. And so it's really important that where you can, you try and make sure that you arrange meetings so you do have breaks in between. If you want to, requesting that you have your camera switched off for meetings where it's not necessary for you to have your camera on, for example, those sorts of things. And then really thinking about how do you assess, when does, I suppose, when does a thing become a particular condition? How do you assess that? How do you actually assess, well, actually, maybe now I need to seek extra support. Maybe I need to go to my GP, or maybe I need to go and see a therapist. How do you actually assess that? And being really open-minded to making sure that you're not pushing it away and pretending it's not really there. No, it's okay, I'll cope. Because, we're all taught to, especially, students, you've done fabulously well at university, and you think, well, I shouldn't be having these difficulties. I shouldn't be feeling this way. And I think it's really important, there's no sort of shouldn't be. If you are, you are, and actually really seeking the appropriate support to make sure you do that. And then, so in employment, things like, you know, being able to have time off for things like appointments or therapy sessions, and joining any support groups in employment might offer. And lots of employers, I know Bird Bird, for example, FCA, lots of employers have sort of mental health support groups or places where you can go to talk to. And so really taking advantage of those things. And then maintaining your mental health as well. So making sure if you're seeking any therapy that you finish the course off, you don't say, oh, I feel a bit better now, that's it, I'll stop going. And then a couple of other things I think are really important is to make sure you maintain your friendships. You see your, see your family, maintain your friendships, keep your connections with your family and friends, make sure you're not getting too sort of overwhelmed by the situation of work, for example. So giving yourself those proper breaks, those proper connections with other people as well, to be able to ensure that they who know you can actually offer you support as well.
Yeah, that is amazing. I think that'd be very helpful for everyone listening, even with like virtual learning. I think they still apply. So I thought we'd move on next to the recruitment process, with it being internship season and a lot of people applying for grad jobs. So starting with you, Amy, then Charlie, did you feel your disability affected you adversely during the recruitment process in any way? And did you ask for any adjustments, and do you wish you asked for any adjustments during the recruitment process?
Yeah, so my approach in the recruitment phase was to be completely honest about my dyslexia. And if I received negative feedback, which was quite rare, but if I did, then it wasn't the firm for me anyway. So that wasn't too much of an issue. Another method was I used mainly EmployAbility, and because of that, because they'd filtered down the actual firms that were extremely dedicated, in my view, to holding out inclusion, diversity and disabilities as something that they wanted to learn more about, but also use that mechanism to apply through, I found that a much better way of applying to opportunities. I think in general, I can give an overall consensus that people handled it very well. But I thought also, by way of example, it might be quite useful to say maybe about one negative experience that I did have, if there's anyone that could benefit. And one experience that I think happens is where there's a lack of acknowledgement or pushback from HR, that they feel like you are potentially saying that what they're doing is wrong. So I went to an assessment centre last year, or it was probably 2 years ago actually, and we were going out to do a written assessment. I had done really well so far in the process, and someone from HR turned around and said, "Oh, Amy Dunleavy, can she please come to the front because she needs to go in a separate room for extra time?" Now, up until that point, I had been doing really well. But the minute that was announced in front of a room of candidates, I felt so much imposter syndrome that I went downhill very, very quickly. And afterwards, I was asked by HR, is there anything that you would change about the day? And I said, well, actually, it was really uncomfortable when you called me out in front of all these people. And HR very much went into denial. And that achieved nothing, because by denying it for themselves, they didn't take the organisation forward. And they made me feel worse as a candidate. I think the other thing to look out for, which I've also had in the past, is where a company is trying to do something new to try and benefit inclusivity. So, for example, one assessment that I also had, they decided to change around the order of the way that they did an online assessment, and then you did an online interview. They instead got me to do the online interview first and then do the assessment. And what happened was I did the online interview, passed it, but then they forgot to send me the online assessment because they hadn't done it in that order before. And I missed out on the last assessment day possible because no one contacted me to do it. And in that situation, my advice would be really proactive. If after a week you've heard nothing and you're thinking, I think they should have sent me something through by this stage, there's no harm in calling up HR and saying, is everything going okay? Because I called up too late. I called up and they said, you didn't do our online assessment. And I was like, I was never sent it. So it's just a useful learning experience. But generally, I've found that everyone that I've gone through with EmployAbility has been really, really good and proactive.
So I really want to echo something that Amy said. So I think when it comes to grad schemes or any type of job, don't see the assessment and recruitment process is, oh, I really hope they want me. Absolutely not. It is as much about, do you want to work for them as they want to work for you? So when it comes to, if you have any uncomfortability around, I don't think I'm going to fit in here because of this, I think don't just discount it straight away. Explore what people can offer you in terms of adjustments and what existing mechanisms are in the organization to help you. But if you feel uncomfortable within an assessment process, I think you will have every right to be like, I don't want to work here. That's completely fine. Secondly, I think I can give 2 examples, again, a positive and a negative one. So a negative one is I had currently been up to about 55 hours of no sleep, and I had a job interview in about 2 hours time. Now, after 55 hours, you are not in a particularly good place to perform well in an interview. You can also get quite emotional. There's lots going on in your head. You can't really think straight. So I contacted the hiring manager and said, look, I'm a clinical insomniac. I've not slept for 55 hours. Please, can we reorganize the interview? And I had a response that said, mate, we all don't sleep sometimes. Come on. And if you are actually an insomniac, you cannot compare to that to just 1 night of no sleep. And I straight away was like, I'm sorry, I want to withdraw this application. At the time, I was unemployed, but for me, it was so much more important to be like, no, I do not want to work somewhere where this is the attitude that they're going to have towards my mental health. The second example I'd like to use is the FCA. So I had the application process in June. I went through one of the government schemes. Now, to be completely honest with you, I've always found it really difficult to disclose my mental health. It's something which I feel comfortable doing because sometimes people want to know quite a lot of detail, which I'm uncomfortable sharing. And I thought, you know what, I want to work somewhere where up front, they are completely aware of the adjustments that I may need for my counselling, the adjustments that sometimes my sleep or my medication may have on me. Because if I disclose it now, I feel completely comfortable knowing they have employed me, knowing everything which I've disclosed. And it was brave because I really wanted the job, and I thought, do I or don't I? But I'm so glad I did, because I had my first round interview through the scheme, which I would recommend anyone doing because it's absolutely fantastic. And when it came to adjustments, I didn't need any adjustments in this particular process, but I had an occupational health review. And obviously since joining in what feels like ages ago now, August, I think I joined, I have had to take a day off sick because of my sleep. And there are times where I've made sure that my team are aware of it. I may be emailing people at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, but it's all completely fine. And my team are great, and that's because I'm comfortable disclosing it. So if you're not comfortable, obviously disclose it to your manager. It's obviously a slightly different kind of approach, but for me, I'm completely comfortable in saying, this is where I stand. These are the adjustments and requirements that I need, because at the end of the day, it's no one else's business. They don't know what you're going through. As long as you have support from the people who you need it from, that's the most important thing. You can't expect, and the reality is, you can't expect everyone to understand, to empathize, or to agree with potentially how your disability affects you. But I think as long as you know what support is available to yourself, that is the most important thing. And it's about having realistic expectations. And I can say at the FCA, I've genuinely been blown away by how much support there's been from my line managers, my colleagues, my peers. But on my first day, I actually read an article about someone who was from our SLT who has clinical insomnia. And straight away, I was like, there's a role model here. I feel really, really welcome and know that there's a support available.
So, Amy, you mentioned how you felt imposter syndrome after being called out during the assessment centre. I think that's quite a common feeling for people who have like a hidden disability, because there's a feeling that you're almost there to fill a quota. Did you have any other experiences of this, and do you have any messages to anyone who has an assessment centre approaching or is approaching work next year, how to deal with feeling like an imposter?
Yeah, so for me, how I view imposter syndrome, and this is something that I've heard other people repeat, is that it's about feeling out of your depth, but you're quite entrenched in the situation. So you're not necessarily scared of failing, but it's kind of more of a sense of being able to get away with something that potentially you're not skilled enough for. So for me, I guess the messages I would say to people kind of going in there is that, firstly, I think everyone feels it. It's how you allow it to affect you. So people that are really successful, what you'll tend to find is that they may have that feeling of imposter syndrome, but they've acknowledged that it may not necessarily go away with success. And so you need to have it as something which you can control and something that you use to your advantage. So if you're in a situation such as an interview where you're thinking, gosh, I can't believe I've got here out of, you know, hundreds of candidates potentially, there's a reason that you are there, and it's because you have been selected by their HR and they clearly think that you're a good fit. So I would just focus on the fact that you have been selected to be there, that other people are feeling it as well around you, but that also it will kind of be with you for quite a long time. So you need to get quite comfortable with that feeling of sometimes being out of depth. And it's not always the worst thing, because that's when you tend to engage, turn on, focus and learn the best. Yeah.
Amy, to your point, I love the way that you use the word entrenched, because I think that is a really great image to say how people can get so stuck in their ways. I think for me, there's four main points on here. The first one is imposter syndrome, I think, is looked at always in the work context, but for me, it's not just work, it's personal. You can have it in your dating life, you can have it with your friends, you can have it with hobbies. And I know, so outside of work, I do gymnastics and platform diving. Even in hobbies, which is meant to be an escape from work or something you do for you, the amount of times I've said to myself, like, I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to be on this team. And that's a reflection of, I think, a lot of the experiences that people may have had where they've had to doubt themselves, or they've been told, you know, you're this or you're that, you're not good enough. And especially with people who have disabilities, I think naturally you're at a disadvantage in some aspects anyway. So that's why that feeling is so entrenched. Secondly, to what Amy said as well, you have to remind yourself when you're getting these feelings. HR have really robust processes. I know at the FCA this year we had 13,000 applications and we had 59 grads start. If you're one of those grads, you have beat thousands of people. We're not going to just, you know, have one interview and go, yeah, he's all right, she's all right. That's why graduate recruitment teams are so big, because of the volumes we're going through and the clear assessment criteria that is in line with behavioural competencies of a whole organisation. So firstly, even if you feel that naturally, you have to say to yourself, if I can't tell myself I'm good enough, I'm going to use the data to tell me that I'm good enough and use the facts around it. Thirdly, successful people get it. You have people who are presidents, people who are heads of departments, CEOs who get imposter syndrome. Success is not going to satisfy your desire for that acknowledgement that you are good enough, because that doesn't come from success. You can, you know, hit it out the park in so many different areas of your life and still feel like a failure. So I think it's about understanding that success isn't going to be something which will quench that desire to feel like you don't have imposter syndrome. You have to seek it in other manners. And the final thing which I've really found important is, outside of your job, outside of your personal life, it's always great to have a mentor. This is someone who you can learn to get on with, they'll learn who you are, they learn who you are. And I think that relationship is so imperative to have, because they can kind of tell you how it is. Now, I have a mentor at the moment from a previous company. She knows absolutely everything about me. And there's a time where she'll give me a slap around the face and she'll say, like, look what you've achieved at your age. And I think it's really important, because you can have it with someone in work or someone outside, but it's really important to give that someone who can ground you when they can say you're going into imposter mode. And by having that relationship, you start to self-identify as to when you're going into it. And then identifying that you have imposter syndrome, I personally think is the first step to kind of help cure yourself of some of those negative associations that it brings.
Yeah, I was just sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to add, I think, Chris, that's absolutely right. I think sometimes being able to identify what it is that you're experiencing, to name it, name it as imposter syndrome, makes it a lot easier, because then you've sort of defined that emotion, that feeling. You're not sort of struggling with, oh, what is it I'm feeling? And so I think that's fantastic as well, to be able to actually define it and to understand it about yourself and what that means for you. I wanted to just go back a little bit. We were talking about experiences that Amy had or Chris had going through recruitment and positive and negative experiences with companies. And I just wanted to highlight to anybody listening that under the Equality Act, whilst you're going through a recruitment process, so it's going to get a bit legal here, Section 60 of the Equality Act says that employers cannot ask you anything about the existence of disability or any details of your disability. Of course, you can choose to tell them, and Chris, you felt comfortable to tell them, and that's absolutely your choice. But I think what's really important to remember is that it's your privacy and therefore it's your choice. But under the law, they can't ask you. The only thing they can ask you, and they of course should ask you, is whether or not you need adjustments in the recruitment process. And then you just have to tell them what adjustments do you need. You don't have to tell them why, you don't have to tell them any other detail. And I know that a lot of organisations, with the right intention, often do ask for things like educational psychologist reports or medical reports, because they want to see, oh, well, I don't know what adjustment this person needs, let me ask them to send me that information. But actually those documents contain some really personal, private information about you in quite a lot of detail. I know that a lot of people aren't very comfortable sharing that information, and you know what, if you don't want to share that information, it's within your right to not share it. You can politely write back and say, actually, I'm not comfortable sharing this with you, but I can tell you what my adjustments are. Now, unfortunately, not the FCA and not Bird and Bird, not many of the other organisations we work with, because we advise them not to do that, don't ask for that sort of information. But I know that a lot of firms do, and they don't even realise that they're effectively breaking the law. So I think if you're a student out there listening today, don't worry about having to disclose your disability. If you want to, then please do, it's your choice. But all you have to talk to a firm about is what adjustments you need, and not anything else if you don't wish to do that. There's no requirement for you to tell them about your disability at all.
So Tab, I think sometimes people know they have a disability and have had different adjustments made throughout university and throughout school. But as they're going into the recruitment process, they don't know what to ask for specifically. Could you give maybe some examples of adjustments that people could ask for, and stuff that is usual within recruitment that you found?
Yeah, and I think, you know, Tim, that's really common. It's really common for students you know, at universities, a lot of support from disability office and so on to understand what adjustments you might need, or in education. And people do extremely well because of those adjustments in education, but often going through a recruitment process requires a whole host of maybe other or additional adjustments, and people don't know what they can ask for. So here there's something else that's in the Equality Act. I promise I'll stop talking about the law shortly, which is a term, reasonable adjustments. It's a term that's in the law, has a very specific meaning in law, but what's happened is it started to be used in common speak by everybody, right? I see things, reasonable adjustments abbreviated to RAs or whatever it might be. Everybody just calls it reasonable adjustments as opposed to just adjustments. What that means is that when a firm asks you, do you have any reasonable adjustments, people don't know what that means. Like, well, I do have an adjustment, but I'm not sure if it's reasonable, or can I reasonably ask for this or not? Actually, most big organizations, if you're applying to big organizations, corporate organizations, pretty much any adjustment you need is going to be reasonable. So don't worry about that reasonable bit. It's going to be reasonable. And second, when we're talking to companies, that's what we tell them. So you know, they're going to make the adjustment for you. But of course, then it's figuring out, well, what can that be? And maybe you haven't had that adjustment before. So what sorts of things, Tim, you ask me? So, well, of course, there's things like extra time, but you might have had 25% extra time going through 3-hour written exams at university, and maybe that was sufficient. But it may not be sufficient for psychometric multiple choice based testing, for example. We had a candidate once who was a maths graduate from Cambridge, and he couldn't pass a numerical reasoning test, and it wasn't because he couldn't do the maths. So I think it can, you know, the style of testing can have an impact as well. So there are many occasions in which we might request from an employer, you know, 50% extra time or 100% extra time, or in certain situations it's unusual, but occasionally we requested an exemption from part of the process. And there is nothing, that is all reasonable. If that's what you need, it's reasonable and it's okay to ask for it. So it could be things like that. It can be things like extra thinking time that I mentioned before. So for some people, they need time to process the information and then to formulate their answer. That's okay too. So we can request that. And then I was saying earlier, changes in attitudinal adjustments. So somebody isn't making great eye contact. If somebody on the autistic spectrum doesn't appear, or anybody else, you know, doesn't appear as enthusiastic as you might expect them to, that's okay. It doesn't mean they're not motivated to be there or for the role necessarily. So that specifically, that in itself can be an adjustment that we can ask for. And a whole host of other things like that, and really pretty much anything that you might need. It can be software, it can be, you know, all of these different things that I've mentioned. It can be things like, sometimes we ask for the adjustment of focus on what the content of what somebody is saying rather than their style of delivering that information, for example. So a whole host of different things that we can request. And if anybody listening isn't comfortable to ask for those sorts of adjustments with an employer, because I think, when you're going through a tricky recruitment process, and again, sort of imposter syndrome sort of comes into this as well. You can be thinking, well, but if I tell them I need all of this, or how I have to negotiate this as well as do really well during the recruitment process, it's a lot to take on. So if you're in that situation, and if you're an employability candidate, you just have to go onto our website and register with us. We can support you with that. We can advocate on your behalf. We know how to do that. We're experienced at doing that. We can make recommendations about what you can get, but also we're very happy to advocate on your behalf, talk to the employer. So when you get there, recruitment process, whichever part that might be in, you can just focus on doing the best you can do with the right adjustments in place.
So once you've gone through this recruitment process, you've hopefully made the adjustments which are needed. Amy, if you go first, what adjustments or coping strategies have you found have helped you settle into work and been able to produce the best quality work which you possibly can?
Yeah, so I mean, my policy was to be quite open from the beginning with regard to not just my dyslexia, but how it actually impacted me. So if you don't feel comfortable potentially disclosing your disability, you may feel a bit more comfortable saying to someone, oh, actually, I really struggle with spelling. So for me personally, I'm really a quite bad speller. But if I have spell check, that problem isn't as big of an issue. So actually very early on in my vacation scheme, which I had to do at Bird Bird, I mentioned to a partner that I was sat beside that actually I'm quite a bad speller, so I do tend to type all of my notes. And he said, well, why don't you just bring your laptop into one of our meetings instead of bringing in a book? Now, at the time, that was quite a hard thing to do because in the legal industry, and maybe not anymore after, working from home, but at the time, people used to only bring in notepads into diaries. They didn't really bring their laptop. So the first day I kind of went in, typed it up, felt a bit uncomfortable, but everyone kind of got over it. And then the second day, suddenly a lot of associates had brought in their laptops and people just realized it was more efficient. It was so much quicker to type things up. Plus you were getting them onto a notes section. So what also helped me is particular software. So OneNote on Microsoft is fantastic. And it was actually designed in a competition by Microsoft employees for dyslexic people. So that's a great tool. But I also found that being emailed tasks. So if someone's going to ask me to do something, instead of them just saying, passing in the corridor, oh, do you mind reviewing this contract and picking out this clause and doing this? I had asked for them to put that in an email. And it just meant that actually, because my short-term memory isn't amazing, I was able to sit down at my desk and know that that email was coming my way to tell me exactly where to look. So I didn't have to panic at the time, try and grab a notebook, remember what they've said, repeat it off the top of my head. And then finally, I thought it might just be useful to quickly touch upon reasonable adjustments that I actually made in application, because it kind of touches upon that, was that I did ask for extra time. But something else that I also wish I had asked for, and I think looking back, I probably would have done, is asking for the interview questions printed out in advance or a rough guide for them, because sometimes I tend to, in the middle of answering a question, forget what the question actually is. And I think that would have really had me at ease. So that's a useful thing if people are thinking about those adjustments.
Amy, I love how you allude to forgetting what the question was halfway through, because I've had to get the document up because I already forgot the question. So completely agree with you on that front. I think when it comes to coping mechanisms for me, because they're kind of like, well, on the mental side as well, but they have that physical repercussions. I think I have an agreement with my manager that if my insomnia has played up in a certain day, that I can take an hour out to have a nap whenever I need to crash. And that's something which has been organized between the two of us. I think in the workplace, you have to understand that obviously your manager may performance manage you, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to tell them everything. And if you're uncomfortable disclosing your disability, you do not have to do that. What I have found really useful is finding people in the organization that I can disclose it to, because then they work in the same organization, they know the culture, they know the HR system. So I think it's always great to have a formal or informal contact in HR that you can refer to with regards to policy. So, from a policy angle, what's kind of acceptable and what can be done. But I think, again, having a mentor or someone in the business as well can be really, really useful to talk to in an informal capacity. I think in terms of other adjustments and how I can kind of cope, sometimes if I'm really struggling with my mental health, I'll go for a walk. Whatever employer I've had, I've always made sure I go for a 10-15-minute walk just to clear my head, disassociate myself from the office situation, take some time, make sure you're eating well, and just have a complete and utter break. I've also realised that, I mean, I've been struggling with my PTSD for around 15 years now, and you learn every year to accept it. You understand it more, but my biggest piece of advice is you are the only expert at your own disability. We can't assume that anyone knows what you're going through. And just because I'm an insomniac and you're an insomniac does not mean that we have the same kind of, you can't put people in an umbrella term because their disability is likely to affect them in a completely different way. So I think you have to own your disability. You have to accept it as well. And I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do. It can take absolutely years, but accepting it is half the battle when it comes to asking for help. Because I think I don't see help as I need help. I see it as I need an adjustment to be able to perform in this manner. So I never see my disability as something which is holding me back. I see it as an empowerment. So I think that when it comes to mechanisms, I think you also learn with experience what does and doesn't help you. And from employer to employer, I think I've always used, whenever I've moved on to a new employer, as an opportunity each time to be a lot more forthcoming with my disability. So rather than, in the fourth or fifth job, I'm now like, I am disabled, this is what I need, you need to do it. Whereas in my graduate scheme originally, I was like, I'm not telling anyone about my mental health. If anyone starts to clock it, I'm going to be paranoid, and worst case, I'll just leave. But this is something you can't teach. This is something, it's an own personal journey. Every single person with a disability will go on. And all I can say is just, yes, it's a lone journey, but you're not alone in the sense that there is so much support out there, formally and informally, to help you accept and own your own disability.
And can I add something quickly to that?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, one of the best things that one of my manager that I previously had ever did was, on my first week, she said, look, so she knew about my disability, and she said, look, if you don't want me to do this, it's absolutely fine, but there is someone else in the organisation that I know that is dyslexic, and if you want, I'm more than happy to reach out to them on your behalf and arrange a meeting so that you can find out what reasonable adjustments they have and what works for them. And what that did for me, by her arranging that meeting, was it took the pressure off me going to approach them, but it also meant that I was then able to discuss with them what coping mechanisms they have. And this was when I was doing an internship, so it was my first proper job. It was completely changed the route, because the advice that they gave me, but also the confidence they gave me to say, it's going to be okay. You have spell check, you have all the things that you need, and anything that you don't need, we're going to get for you. So that could be a useful thing for someone to just be aware of. So either ask your manager, if you are a manager, to try and have those contacts ready for someone when they come in through the door, because it can honestly change the path of the rest of your working time there.
So I think that links perfectly to our final question before we open it up for a Q&A, which is, hopefully we have some future leaders or managers on this today or watching this afterwards. What advice would you give to them about making their workplace inclusive? I think, Chris, if you go first.
Yeah, of course. So I think you mentioned, future managers, future leaders. First of all, some of you may not want to be managers or leaders, and that's completely fine. And secondly, don't see yourself as a manager or a leader. See yourself as a future role model, because what we're all experiencing now, you have the power to change that for someone in your position in the future. And I think that's an absolutely beautiful thing that we can all take from this. When it comes to advice, I think, we've touched on it before. Every single person who has a disability, rather than seeing it as something which prevents them from doing something, or something that doesn't enable them to do it in the similar capacity, use this as a driver for innovation. Use this as a driver, as your superpower means you can do it differently. And difference is what is going to get you noticed. So I think embrace your disability, make sure that you go on that journey of acceptance, because that is the hardest part of it. But once you get there, you honestly will be absolutely unstoppable, because where your head takes you with your innovation, no one else is able to do that. So the last bit of advice I would say is that you are the only expert at yourself. You cannot expect other people to understand where you're coming from. You cannot expect other people to feel the same way. that means that you are also have, organizations can do a certain amount, but you also have to be a trailblazer. You have to be proactive, because people will not give you adjustments. People will not, be able to assist you if you are not fully forthcoming about what it is that you require.
Amy?
Yeah, so I think I would just, to summarize a good point that's being kind of raised, is that it's really important to get yourself a role model, if that's possible, or some form of a mentor. I think that's absolutely great advice. I think also acknowledging and recognizing that every disability and every adjustment that someone requires is going to be completely different, because everyone has different experiences. So I think it's about ensuring that you get the adjustments that you need, and that if you're going to be a future manager that's looking at other people's adjustments, that their adjustments probably won't be the same as yours. They could be quite different. Yeah.
Tab, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, so I mean, I would just echo everything that Chris and Amy have said, but also if you need adjustments, just ask for them, because if you need them without them, you, in a sense, almost discriminating against yourself, because you're not going to give yourself the best possible chance of getting through a competitive process. And so it's really important, and even in the workplace, we say to employers, look, if you want the best return on investment on your employees, make sure you create a culture in which they can actually get the right adjustments to perform as well as they can. And for you, if you as a future leader, for sure, create that environment for your employees, get the best out of them, but also for yourselves. Really important that you are able to do as well as you possibly can. You give yourself that best chance of doing that. And you know what, the law protects you, but more importantly than the law, and again, everything we're saying to companies now, it's all about beyond compliance. It's not just about the law. Equality Act has been around for 10 years. The ADA has been around in the US for a long time. But forward-thinking companies are all thinking about best practice beyond compliance, and that's one of where you create that belonging. And I think it's really just really interesting to hear as well. I mean, I have had in the past very bad panic attacks, and even though it's quite interesting for me, even though I set up EmployAbility 14 years ago, run this business, it only struck me about, I don't know, 6 years ago, that I was like, oh, one day I was like, oh, I guess I have a disability. I had never really thought of it in that way before. It just hadn't occurred to me. And why? Because I was so used to managing, not sort of having a functioning on 2 hours sleep, or just managing it all myself. And I hadn't really necessarily spoken to my people in my team about it even. And it just hadn't even occurred to me to do that. And actually, once I was able to do that, seek the right support, on occasion when I'd had 2 hours of sleep and found it really hard to function in the morning, I was able to say to my team, well, actually, you know what, I'm going to start a bit later today, because it made it so much easier in many ways. So in fact, the adjustment I was looking for then was understanding from my team and acceptance from my team. So even when you work in this space, even when you think you know everything there is to know about adjustments, when it comes to yourself, I think we can often behave differently and not seek that support. But so important, please do seek the support, ask for the adjustments you need, and give yourself the best possible chance of success.
Tim, may I add something very quickly? Something that you've mentioned, Tab, kind of triggered me in a good way. I think when it comes to disabilities, a lot of people disclose it only when they feel they need to. You can be massively high performing and disabled. However, think about how much easier it would be if you did disclose things, because throughout my time in my grad scheme and also my second employer, I was high performing and I was, massively depressive and had so many issues, but I just carried on through. And I look back now and think to myself, like, I still could have been that high performing, but I could have also had such a better quality of life and well-being if I had just accepted that I can get adjustments, that they're right. So I think acknowledging that in the first instance is a huge thing. And just because you can manage without shouldn't deter you from still seeking that support.
That's amazing. Thank you for those messages. So I thought we've probably got time for one or two quick questions. So if people either want to unmute themselves or type a question on the chat and test my eyesight, then it's up to you guys. So either type a question on the chat if you've got any, or unmute yourself.
Tim, in the meantime, as I just want to make it clear that for those of you who are watching either now or on the recorded version, please feel free to add me on LinkedIn. And if you've got any particular questions with regards to disability or experience, please feel free to email them over. I've always got time to make sure that we're, answering any questions that you may have, whether it's in a private capacity or just in general.
Perfect.
Great. Something else I wanted to add as well is that we've got lots of internships, graduate programs opening up on our website, are open on our website already. So please do go on. I'll type the URL to our website in the chat. But also, importantly, since we have Chris and Amy here, we partner with FCA, we partner with Bird and Bird. They're both fantastically inclusive organisations, and we can support you throughout the recruitment process. Please do apply to them if you're interested in those particular sectors, but also any of the employers that we're partnering with. Please have a look and please make applications. And if you're applying to a company that we're not partnering with currently, we can still support you. So please do reach out to us and register with us.
Amazing. So it doesn't look like there are any questions. Oh, no, Ivana. So what are more examples of the forward-thinking companies you know of that do a good job at making adjustments for disabilities? Tab, do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think this is something we really, at EmployAbility over the last year, been thinking about. We're doing a whole rebranding exercise at the moment with our website, which will be live soon. But as part of that, we did a survey amongst our students, amongst the companies we work with, to really try and understand what is it that makes a forward-thinking company inclusive, or what is it that they're doing that's different. And for us, we're calling this next generation inclusive thinking, the companies that we're working with, and really getting them to engage with that. And for us, this is about be flexible. Make sure that you offer adjustments. So it's not just about saying that you're inclusive, actually, what are you really doing about that? So have, partner with not just EmployAbility, but any other organizations who are working in this space to make people feel comfortable to be able to have confidential discussions about the adjustments they might need, and that you can then make whatever adjustments people are asking for. So don't limit yourself. There are some companies that I speak to who'll say, but we only give 25% extra time for dyslexia. To which I have to respond, well, you can say that, but it's against the law. So you have to give them what they need, actually. You can't say we only have these prescribed adjustments. So be flexible. And I think, what else are they doing? I think one of the other things we're really reaching out to employers to do, and forward-thinking companies are doing this, is about getting senior people within those organizations to lend their voice and to lend their weight to really pushing the agenda. Actually really pushing the agenda, engaging with people within their own firm, not just opening their doors, but actually changing their processes. I can hardly ever say, always strong with that word. Adjusting the process that they have in place, making sure they've got a really well-defined workplace adjustments process as well. Because so many companies I speak to want to do the right thing, and then I say to them, okay, so if I work for you and I have a disability, what would I do? Who would I go and talk to get the adjustments? And they go, oh, would it be my manager? Would it be HR? Who would it be? So make sure you have, forward-thinking companies have sort of a thinking, and if they haven't already got it, they're working on these sorts of things. So adjustments in the workplace, adjustments in the recruitment process without barriers in the process, and then having senior people in the company actually really pushing that agenda, I'd say.
Amy, Chris, Tab, can I sneak in one more question?
Go for it.
Okay. Amy, so someone on the chat is also dyslexic and asks, could you expand on having a mentor or how you found a mentor?
Yeah, of course. So I specifically, in terms of being in the legal industry, there's a great mentorship scheme called Grow Mentors. Now, Luke, I don't know if you're in the legal industry, but that's a great way of getting a mentor. They partner up basically anyone who's looking to get into the legal industry with someone who's already in the legal industry. And for me specifically, I specified that when I became a mentor to help someone get a training contract, that I wanted to be partnered up with someone who was dyslexic or with a disability to try and aid that progression, that kind of chain of helping. if you aren't in that industry, I think firstly, one of the best steps to actually getting a mentor is to having experience in the workplace, because once you get into the workplace, it's quite a useful place where you can make connections with people that you see kind of career aspirations or similar career goals from, and you can ask them and reach out. And as long as you've established a good relationship and you have clear goals for mentorship, that's a great way of kind of having someone who you disclose potentially if you feel comfortable with dyslexia too. And then finally, I think I would say just when it comes to looking for mentorship, there is a lot of other schemes online. So I think maybe Tab will know some more, but you definitely through employability, through either getting a job and then finding someone that you really aspire to be like, whether they're in your department or not, and reaching out and asking them to be a mentor, or on the other hand, going through a different scheme which is specific to kind of the route you want to go down. So for law, an example would be Grow Mentors.
So thank you very much, Tab, Amy and Chris, for joining us. I think it's been a really amazing and informative session. To anyone who's watching this afterwards, make sure you look at the link in the description, and we have employability in there. We have Chris's LinkedIn, potentially Amy's LinkedIn if she wants it. And so make sure you add them and check it out. Thank you for watching, and yeah, have a good evening.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.